Bienvenidos, fans of the hottest entertainment on the planet. Jaime En Fuego here, and I welcome you to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. But this is a very special edition. First video of this I have done on my personal channel, because this, for many years, resided on The Horror Show, along with Hail to Stephen King. But, yep. The son of the king has something new coming out for the first time in a while, his first novel in about 10 years. So it's an installment of none other than Run to the Hill! Yeah, that's right, guys. And so Joe Hillstrom King, his technical name, but, King's son, his much more successful son, let's be fair, and that's not to knock Owen King, who has put out a few books himself, but, yeah, man, Joe has really made a name for himself, most notably because of the fact that he didn't go by the King name. He wasn't trying to make it, off of his father's prestige and acclaim and, reputation and all that stuff, and so even when Joe started out and was submitting short stories to, UK, publications and things like that, he didn't want anybody to know who he was. Eventually, just like his dad with the Bachman alias, it eventually did come to be. But so he announces this week. He'd been teasing it for a while, but Joe finally made the announcement. He returned to the socials because he shut down his X, Twitterverse, whatever the hell you want to call it. But, he stopped using that account a while back. I believe he migrated over to Threads, or maybe it was Blue Sky or both. I don't know. But he returned in some capacity to the socials to properly announce this book entitled King Sorrow, as you are seeing from that wicked artwork right there. And as you can tell by the cover art, big old red dragon stuff on it, man. Yeah, this is a book that is going to have both fantasy elements, obviously some horror elements. We'll get to the synopsis here in a little bit, but King Sorrow, very cool title. I got to say, it does sound like the title of like a prog metal album, something you'd hear from like Blind Guardian or, one of those bands from over there, Delane, or I don't know, whatever. Any of the bands that deal with, wizards and magic and sorcery and craziness and whatnot. So, very interesting title. And so as King, Joseph Hillstrom King, to be fair, but as Joe said when he was talking with Today.com, he did a brief interview with them about this book. He's like, yeah, I haven't put out something in almost 10 years, but that's, I've still, he's still been busy, between the comic stuff that he was doing. So obviously he rounded out Lock and Key in those years. It was a while back that he finished up Lock and Key, but Lock and Key was turned into a few seasons of a Netflix series. Started out really strong. It didn't really finish itself too particularly well, but I did like the cast in that, especially the actress from, the deaf film who played Kinsey. I thought she was especially exceptional. Anyway, so there was that. There's a few seasons of Nosferatu, which I thought started out really, really good. I like that actress who played Vic, too. I mean, that's a great thing about Joe, is he does write, very strong, impressive female characters. And then, The Black Phone was a big hit later this year. I believe it's coming out. I should consult my notes here. That's why I have them. So on the 17th of October, which is actually the same month that King Sorrow comes out. King Sorrow arrives on the 21st of October. But Black Phone 2, the sequel with Scott Derrickson, the Sinister director, returning to direct this one as well. The standout in that was the little sister, the Lil McGraw girl. I thought she was great. But there's also a villainous return in Ethan Hawke, although you got to figure, without spoiling too much, there's going to be a supernatural element with regards to any sort of return. And that's still a film that I got to say, The Black Phone was one that if not for all of the talent associated, Savini was doing the masks for the grabber. I'm trying to remember what the hell what the nickname of the villain was in that Ethan Hawke played. But, aside from all of the talent assembled for it, including our lead boy in that, who gets kidnapped and locked in that basement area and stuff. He's in the live-action version of How to Train Your Dragon, so that's pretty exciting. But, yeah, I was not the biggest fan of The Black Phone, and over there is the deluxe edition of 20th Century Ghosts. I was like, there are so many better things in this collection, in my estimation, whether it was pop art or best new horror or the title story. Abraham's Boys was really good, although I heard they were trying to make that into a movie at one particular point, but it just, the rights lapsed or whatever. The Cape feels like it would be just completely ripe for an adaptation right now. But I think The Boys kind of stole that anti-hero thunder. You also had Brightburn or whatever, the one with evil little Superman kid that had Elizabeth Banks. I was thinking Shannon Elizabeth for a second for whatever damn reason. But in any event, the Black Phone was not a personal favorite from the 20th Century Ghost collection, but Derrickson did a hell of a job. Performances were great. I love the recreation of the whole 70s aesthetic and stuff. And so I'm very much looking forward to Black Phone 2 coming out in October. But so, yeah, I mean, and then he also had his Hill House comic books, which had like Basket Full of Heads. And I believe Sea Dogs was like a little mini sort of comic that he did. He also was curating stuff from a bunch of other people and releasing it. I believe that was in conjunction with DC Vertigo, I want to say, because, you know, they were also behind, were they behind? I'm going to put my foot in mouth and not even going to say that they were behind Lock and Key because I can't remember right off the top of my head. But so bottom line, even in that 10-year interim since he put out the Fireman, which I was a big fan of, even though there were some detractors saying, oh, it's too much like The Stand, he's ripping off his dad, whatever. Well, it was kind of a twinner, you know, kind of novel in that regard. And he even said that, if I recall correctly, in a few interviews where he was discussing the Fireman. But yeah, so he hasn't put out a novel since the Fireman, which was also a big monster of a story. And yes, as Hill also pointed out, there were a few collections. You know, he put out the Full Throttle collection, which is right there, that had all kinds of exceptional stuff in it. And then you also had the Strange Weather, I believe it was called, which had some really solid stuff in there too. So, I mean, yeah, he hasn't put out a novel proper, but Joe has been a busy bee, man, and so you can't really fault him for that because he's been dipping his hands into all kinds of different things. But first novel proper, King Sorrow. And so I'm going to talk about that at least a little bit here since I've given all the preamble and such, but then I'm also going to briefly touch on the other two things that he released in the last year or so. It was 2 different short stories because there's some interesting information to give about those. But once again, King Sorrow, which is coming out on the 21st of October, and in his most recent Escape Hatch, if I recall correctly, I'm just going to bring it up here on my phone. So Escape Hatch, if you guys aren't aware, is Joe Hill's newsletter that he puts out, and usually monthly, at least when he's like a little more moving and grooving, although sometimes he'll go a few months without putting it out. But it's also listed here as Joe's Substack, and you can subscribe to it for free. So it's always cool when I get the surprise of seeing one of those pop up in my inbox and stuff, and I'm just like, oh, after all of the ads and all the other garbage that I get, you know, when I see a newsletter from Joe, it's pretty exciting. So let's just jump to a photo of that handsome devil looking more and more like his dad, rocking the beard and everything. But so this is what Joe had to say first and foremost. He's like, it's been a while, huh? By the time this comes out, it will have been almost 10 years since the last novel. Although I'd argue I didn't exactly vanish. There were graphic novels, there were a couple of collections, there was some film and TV stuff. 10 years is a long sabbatical from the day job, though. It won't be anywhere near as long before the next one, but more on that another day. I'm grateful to today for making a big splash with the King Sorrow reveal. I did a brief Q&A. We talked about that already. And this is the more important thing that I just want to make sure to mention is Joe says that you can pre-order today from all the usual suspects. There's nothing my publisher likes more than a big old heaping helping of pre-orders. But also, as with all my other books, I've partnered up with my local Water Street Books to offer signed first editions to anyone who wants to place a pre-order. I'll even personalize. That's pretty dope. So if you guys want to do your part in that regard and, like pre-order directly, the only issue that I find with that sometimes is if you're really hoping for that book day of, not necessarily going to happen, especially if you're asking for like a personalized sort of copy. I had the pleasure when Joe was doing a brief little book tour for Full Throttle to actually get a very cool personalized, signed edition from him and meet him and chat it up. And I told him about Run to Joe Hill, the special program. And I was like, yeah, I've got your dad's thing, Hail to Stephen King. And then I've got Run to the Hill. And he's like, dude, that's awesome. So, I've not had the opportunity and the blessing to meet Sai King in person, but his son was tremendous and nothing but respect, super chill, super nice. I've I've been at those sort of situations where the author or the actor or whatever is like really pushy, and there were a ton of people at this little local bookstore in Scottsdale here in Arizona, and like the whole place was packed and that line was long. I was about halfway through. I went and attended that with Cecil, so that was cool. But yeah, so King Sorrow, if you want to get it directly from his publisher, once again, that is Water Street Books. So if you just search that. And then in the rest of the escape hatch, Joe goes into the fact that he also has another book which is significantly smaller. It's, according to him, more along the size of like heart-shaped box or horns. So it's not going to be a massive tome like this upcoming King Sorrow that I checked the page count on Amazon shortly before starting to record this. 896 pages. So it's not just below 1,000 like he was saying in a few of those different interviews and whatnot. But still, guys, I mean, exciting stuff. Joe, for my money, because I've read everything that he has done, every comic book, all of his novels and short stories that I've been all the stuff in the collections, and excuse me, a little nose scratch there, but it was nowhere near as daunting of a task as when I read every single thing in published order that his dad put out. That took like 6 years. But, as I cruise through all of Joe's stuff, and, especially what I still think is like his swan song magnum opus. Well, I guess swan song isn't the proper term because that would entail like the end of a career or whatever. But his magnum opus is most definitely Lock and Key. And so he has like a completely clean track record, In Strange Weather, I thought some of the storytelling, I'm not going to name any of those foreign novellas specifically because, I don't want to, I'm a registered independent. He was kind of like his dad, getting a little heavy-handed with his politics in a couple of the stories in Strange Weather. But, regardless, he still has a completely clean slate. He hasn't put out something that I didn't like. Can't say the same for his father, even though Steve is my favorite author of all time, and having gone through his entire published work, which was a daunting task, but still so fulfilling. Joe, on the other hand, man, I mean, to better or lesser degrees, but he still has not put out something that I thought was subpar or lacking or anything like that. So let's get into the actual description that we have. And so I'm referring to this on Cemetery Dance, because Cemetery Dance has done a number of amazing special editions of Stephen King, his dad. I mean, they're currently rounding out the Doubleday years, which as of right now, they have Carrie, Salem's Lot, and The Shining that are all out. The Stand is on pre-order, and then the fifth and final one from that initial contract that Steve had was for Pet Sematary, the drawer book that he basically gave to Doubleday years later after I believe he had already pivoted to Viking by that time. But so, yeah, man, I mean, and then the It Special Edition was great. I mean, Cemetery Dance does tremendous stuff. You can also, if you care to, pre-order King Sorrow from them. But let's check out this synopsis that we have, and then I will give some thoughts about it. So let's read this along, peeps. All right, so I'm going to switch back over to the cover so you don't have to look at my silly mug while I'm reading here, all right? Okay, so Arthur Oakes is a reader, a dreamer, and a student at Rackham College, Maine, renowned for its frosty winters, exceptional library, and beautiful buildings. But his ideal and burgeoning romance with Gwen Underfoot is shattered when a local drug dealer and her partner corner him into one of the worst crimes he can imagine, stealing rare books from the college library. Trapped and desperate, Arthur turns to his closest friends for comfort and help. Together they dream up a wild, fantastical scheme to free Arthur from the cruel trap in which he finds himself. Wealthy, irrepressible, Colin Wren suggests using the unnerving Crane Journal, bound in the skin of its author, to summon a dragon to do their bidding. The others, brave, beautiful Allison Shiner, the battling twins Donna and Donovan McBride, and brainy, bold Gwen, don't hesitate to join Colin in an effort to smash reality and bring a creature of the impossible into our world. But there's nothing simple about dealing with dragons, and their pact to save Arthur becomes a terrifying bargain in which the six must choose a new sacrifice for King Sorrow every year, or become his next meal. All right, guys, so first and foremost, I gotta say, I am hoping to high heavens that this does not turn into a fairy tale situation like what happened with Sai King, with Joe's father. I was so very looking forward to that, and I know it was King's kind of love letter to the fact that he's real close friends with George R.R. Martin, and he just really was getting that itch to do a fantasy book, and that boy and his dog going over. Anyway, that was something that I thought was going to have some Tower connections, and I think that it was very similar to like with the Institute, where it was a burden of expectation. I was really expecting some of that connective tissue. Wasn't there in the end, and not to get into any massive spoilers or whatever. It was a fine enough book. It was a serviceable enough book, but I must admit, it did not wow me. And so that's kind of the first thing that I'm thinking of here, where I'm just like, okay, so Joe is going to veer into fantasy now. Okay, that's cool. And like, it seems like it's going to have, Arthur and names like that, and dragons. This, you can tell that in the Today article, Joe even said that he had to read a lot of this particular type of fantasy literature when he was at the university. And so he was like, I wanted to actually, put it into use, as opposed to there's so many people who study this stuff and then it's like donuts. It's like never used again. You just study it for shits and giggles, more or less, in college. I took a children's literature class. I absolutely adored it. That stuff has been incorporated into a few of my story ideas, and since returning to Arizona State to study, film and media, and, I've taken the screenplay classes and some stuff like that. So, it's helpful, but unless you're successful enough, I guess, it's just really kind of a passion, hobby sort of thing. Now, shout out to my buddy Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, because I know, whereas horror is my forte, fantasy is most definitely to the high heavens, to use that phrase once again, and beat a red-headed dead horse, or a red dragon in this particular case. But, yeah, he knows his stuff far better than I could even have the slightest shred of a grasp, because while I appreciate, this high fantasy sort of stuff, it's never really been something I've explored in depth. I read The Hobbit as a kid. I love Eyes of the Dragon, Sai King's story. So yes, Joe's dad also did another sort of story. And this is where I also have to make a few comparisons. I'm being candid, I'm being honest here. Having read all of Joe's stuff and all of Steve's stuff, I'm like, okay, Pact of Friends in Maine, around the 6 to 7 number, so on and so forth. Vengeful Creature. Do you see what I'm making a comparison with here? Yeah, so I think that the Peanut Gallery has a little bit of ammunition, much like they did with the Fireman, where they're just like, oh, it's taking a lot of cues from the Stand. He's trying to do his dad. But then again, Nosferatu was such an amazing, let's not comment about the movie, but, the Nosferatu, and I know they changed the titles, numbering a little bit for the UK release of that, but, the license plate, spelling it out. That was such an original work of fiction. Christmas Land, and, it was exceptional, and I love that book. I don't know if it's it's really tough to pinpoint a favorite of Joe's novels, because they are all so drastically different. It's one of the tough things that I think his father is encountering right now, is the fact that so much of his work is feeling derivative of his own work, because he's been at it for 50 years now. Over 50 years if you include when he was first publishing short stories and stuff like that. So Joe, at least, with, Heart-Shaped Box is so insanely different. Judas Coin's still one of my favorite characters he's ever written, man. Love that stuff. That is the one that they've adapted. I can understand why the Fireman would be really tough to adapt, because it is like the Stand, sprawling, epic, and would require a crazy budget. But, if you had Scott when I first heard Scott Derrickson was doing a Joe Hill adaptation, I was like, please be Heart-Shaped Box, please be Heart-Shaped Box, because they did Horns with Henry Radcliffe, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. The book is, the book's always better. This was, there are instances where the book is better, and there's also instances like The Black Phone where the movie is better. But from my experience, it's usually where you can make something superior when you're taking a short story and you're expanding upon it in comparison with when you have a large book like what happens with his dad, Steve's stuff all the time where you have to condense it down. That's where you're kind of primed and prepped for disappointment, I think. And I just love this shirt, man, with the both of them on there, even though they don't give Steve's hairline like a lot of respect, which is kind of funny. But in any event, Joe, his stuff has not felt derivative of itself, and I'm really disappointed that Heart-Shaped Box hasn't been made into something yet. Fireman, but the Fireman is so drastically different than Nosferatu, and so drastically different than Horns, and so drastically different, and the point I was neglecting to make from earlier was that even how unique Nosferatu was, it's still, because of the fact that he threw in some comparisons, some tie-ins with, with Pennywise and whatever, like he actually gave some nods to the fact that he was another level of the tower, and that he had those multiverse connections with his pops, and he was criticized for it, and so point being that with a synopsis like this, I'm not going to tear it to pieces, but I will say that it does at least raise my eye, raise an eyebrow a little bit, and you're just like, okay, Joe, I have the utmost faith in you, but it does seem reminiscent of some stuff that that your pops has done. But then again, he wrote the whole youthful aspect very well with Horns, and so I have and also with the younger bits with Vic in Nosferatu. So excuse me. So I'm just gonna take a little drinking my beverage. I've been doing a lot of Harkin Theater lately. Not a plug, not a sponsor, but, supporting my local theater here in Arizona. But, so, in any event, yes, bottom line, we do have a situation where some people who are very familiar with his dad's work, and you don't even have to be very familiar with his dad's work here, like, everybody knows it. Everybody knows Pennywise after that 2017 film, and then we have Welcome to Derry coming soon. So, nonetheless, though, I have the utmost faith in Joe Hill's writing prowess, his intelligence, and he has become very prolific from an adaptation standpoint. And so coming out on October 21st, once again, everybody, it is entitled King Sorrow. You saw that badass art. I'm wondering what the UK art's going to look like, or if it's going to be the same. I mean, who knows? This is the art that he's been revealing on all of his socials, whether it was Threads or whether it was X or Instagram, whatever. And so I'm curious to see what sort of variation we could potentially have. But as of now, that artwork kicks ass. It is very metal, and yes, of course, I am stoked to go through all 900 pages of Joe Hill's upcoming epic. And just to jump back to the escape hatch real quick, where he gives a little bit of that final insight about, so let's just jump back to it real quick, and we're not losing ratings too terribly bad. So he's like, I mentioned it won't be a 10-year wait between novels next time. I think I'm 2 months off from finishing a new one. It's my first short one in quite some time, about the same length as Horns or Heart-Shaped Box. I like to bang out a few novels between now and when I turn 60, and I can't do it if they're all 800 pages long. And he even mentioned at another point in the escape hatch here, he's like, I have been thinking about this book since the Fireman, because, Dragon Scale was the thing that was causing these people to have the situation where Kenny was holding in his farts on that South Park episode, and then he starts spontaneously combusting. I make a South Park reference anytime I can. But yeah, if you guys have never read the Fireman, though, dude, I love that story. The title character is a very amusing Brit. You've got some very interesting Mary Poppins references. You've got some, it's a terrific book, and there's some very cool musical elements to it as well. So yeah, guys, a high time recommend for me. But Joe, bring on that smaller one that I'm sure he's gonna allow this to go through the duration of its life cycle and everything. So that is my thoughts, guys, on King Sorrow. But as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, there is a little bonus bit that I wanted to mention, because I thought about doing individual videos about 2 different short stories that Joe released. The first one was entitled The Pram, and that was September 26th of 2023. And then just last year, he put out a significantly shorter story than that, which was entitled Ushers. And that was actually released on the 1st of November in 24, so just a couple of months up, before this videotaping. But that one was actually available a month previous, on October 1st, for if you were like a Prime member, because it was an Amazon, Kindle and Audible thing, similar to what the Pram was, although the Pram was from like a creature feature collection. Reason I didn't do individual videos about those shorts. Now, I've done that for Hail to Stephen King with his dad, where I'm like, yeah, there's a new shorts, and there's actually a new Sai King short story that is on its way to me right now from Cemetery Dance, and yes, I am going to do a video about that. But the thing was, since returning to Arizona State, as I mentioned at one point in this video, I've been super, super, super busy, and I just really wanted to double down on some more like big time content, all-encompassing content, if it came to something for Joe. And I think this is a really good chance to actually kind of cover both of these stories just really quickly. So I'm going to start with the one that I liked a lot less first, and then I will pivot over to the second one. So that was the one that actually came with a little bit more prestige, actually, entitled Ushers. And so the one that came out just a couple of months ago, and once again, you can get it on Audible. I think it's only like $1.99 if you want to listen to somebody read it, but it's very, very short. Or you can also grab it on Kindle. I think it's free on Kindle if you're a Prime member. But so this one, to me, talking about things being derivative and whatnot, it's one of the few Joe Hill things where it did feel pretty derivative to me, unfortunately. And that's where if I kind of pointed out some stuff that it's reminiscent of, it might be a little spoilery. But this is essentially about a kid named Martin. And Martin, there's two different interrogation segments that transpire. One is an official one. One is a little more like unofficial, unconventional, takes place at the Texas Roadhouse. I'm assuming Joe didn't have a recommendation, but he's always been very much like his dad, a very like meat and potatoes Americana. I love my Big Macs and I love my onion blossoms at Roadhouse and stuff like that. But so this kid Martin, he's being interrogated by these two detectives, and so I believe one is called Oates and the other one is like Hall something, and he's just like Hall and Oates, but it's not quite. One of the names doesn't quite add up, but it almost does. He's like, make my dreams come true. I've always been partial to that one. So I mean, this is the thing: the dialogue between our main kid, who's like this early 20-something, kind of snarky, he is being. They're investigating to see if he has any connection to a particular crime. It was a train derailment that went down. And so these two guys are kind of good cop, bad copping it with him, trying to feel it out, trying to figure it out. And so the second instance of discussion, interrogation or whatever, second interview, I think is what he calls it in the story, if I recall correctly. That's the one where Martin actually just runs into one of the detectives and they sit down at the bar, they're drinking their Blue Moons, it's all classy with the orange and whatever, finishing up the onion blossom. And so that's where you get a little bit more of the lore that I think Joe was really just giving us a hint with this particular story. And the reason that I say that is because even before this story was released, in February 22nd, actually, of 2024, there was a Deadline report that the rights to this story had already been acquired by Screen Gems. You had Gary Dauberman, who I have very mixed feelings about, the protege of James Wan's, though. He's been behind a lot of horror stuff that I had kind of mixed feelings about, most notably the recent Salem's Lot remake and whatever. But mixed feelings about Gary Dauberman. Some people really liked his work with the 17 and 19, whatever. I still really dig those films, even though I'm not the biggest fan of his screenwriting necessarily. But Dauberman producing, Screen Gems had acquired the rights. So Joe was essentially, with his clout after the success of The Black Phone, I would imagine, everyone's like, oh, Joe Hill's got a new story. Bam, let's suck it up. And this one was actually supposed to be a part of a collection called New Demons, I believe. Joe R. Lansdale, who was the guy behind Bubba Hotep most notably, he was behind this collection was a Kickstarter. It was going to be this anthology with a bunch of other stories. Chuck Wendig, his brother Owen, was going to have a story in there, a number of other authors. And then I'm assuming the Kickstarter wasn't pulling the numbers that they were hoping because they abruptly canceled it. Joe decided to just release the story on his own. So I'm really wondering if those rights are just going to lapse, or if they're maybe waiting to see how the Black Phone 2 performs, because I know there's typically windows of around 2 years, maybe 3, depending on how the rights are negotiated, where you have to at least get something into pre-production, or else the rights are going to lapse. So I don't know if this is going to end up turning into something, but I can understand how it would, because even if it was very derivative of things like Unbreakable and Final Destination. I mean, they say in the story that there is, they mention Wings of Desire, which was a German film, if I remember correctly. German or French? Damn, I can't remember. I feel like an idiot. But I know it was remade here in the States, A City of Angels. But Wings of Desire, great black and white film, this really funny cameo from Columbo himself, Peter Falk. But yeah, they even mentioned that movie in the story. So that's Joe wearing his influences on my sleeveless shirt, wearing his influences on his sleeve, which is fine, you know. So this was more with the events that are talked about, you know, because there's not just a train event, there's also a school shooting event. There's like a series of things that they're questioning Martin about with potential connection. And so without getting into too many spoilery specifics, I can see the potential for this to be expanded into a feature, because it feels like kind of a little morsel of a meal, if that makes sense, you know? So in any event, upon re-listening to it again last night, I found more merit, and most notably in the snippiness of Joe's dialogue, which I've always really enjoyed. Like, at this point in Steve's career, I don't know if he writes dialogue as richly as he used to. I mean, in certain cases he does, but yeah, I don't know. Joe still, excuse me, Joe still really has a hell of a knack for it. He's like right in that prime, you know, sort of situation as far as that, and much more connected to youthfulness and in any event. But so yeah, I'm wondering if Ushers is still going to actually be turned into a movie. But I don't know. It's worth giving a read, I guess, for if you're going to listen to it for $1.99 or read it free on Kindle or whatever. But I'm not going to go as far as to say it's half-baked, but I did find it a little too reminiscent of a lot of other things, and I could see how it almost felt like kind of an elevator pitch sort of thing, or like, yo, this kid and this thing going on, and I don't want to spoil anything, all right? So I'm just going to leave it at that. But the story that I recommend the hell out of, especially after, listening to it again last night, because this is one where I kept thinking it was going to be brought into a collection, and I'm very much like it. So I've read this and I've listened to it, but I'm just like Steve and Joe, man. Shout out once again to my buddy Mike. I know he does not like audiobooks at all, and there is a very purist mentality to that. But, you know, I had read it, and then I had listened to it, which is how I approach all of Steve's stuff. I'm going through the new Nick Cutter book right now, as I'm still right about to get the semester started proper. It's called The Queen. And so I've been going back and forth between reading and listening on that one. But, you know, last night I was like, I'm redoing my King bookshelf over there on the other set. And I was like, I'm just going to put in the earbuds and I'll listen to the Pram and to Ushers one more time, as I'm just kind of, rearranging stuff on the bookshelves and whatever. And yeah, I can't immerse myself in a story. You know, I can listen to music, and I love doing that, and listen to sports podcasts, whatever else. But, you know, I love listening to a story. And, you know, it's very much a preferential personal thing. If you don't like having a story read to you, you don't like going through it like that. And I can understand the tangible aspect of something physical in your hands. These stories have not been physically released yet, either of them. But, guys, the one that came out in September of 23, the Pram. This is the one that I felt so much more of a compulsion to review by itself, because this one really hit me. I thought it was excellent, and especially upon another listen to it last night as I was messing around with redoing some of the books, I loved it even more, man, because this is folk horror at its finest, and this is a great instance of where it was reminiscent of things that I have, seen and read before, but it had so much more just unique just tissue and aspects about it and everything. That's where you can the old phrase, there's nothing new under the sun. There's a lot of truth to that. So, but it's like with music where you're like, okay, we like this band and I'm going to incorporate this influence and this influence. But it's when you put all of those ingredients, into a pot and you proportion them, and then you decide, I'm going to season it with more of this. And, I'm going to, people usually don't put this in this particular dish. And sometimes it works if you try to get experimental. Sometimes it doesn't. But, it's where when you bring enough fresh ideas to familiar scenarios, I guess, and that's the best way I can describe this one, because you have this couple, Marianne and Willie, I believe their names are, and so they were living in New York City, married for a few years, expecting a child, and then this is a pandemic story, by the way, just for anybody who gets triggered by pandemic stories and whatever, but it's not like injecting heavy-handed politics like his dad tends to do. But so there is a miscarriage that happens, and at the same time, Willie, our main character, he also, around the same time that this miscarriage happens, Marianne loses their child. He also gets COVID, and he was one of those where the COVID affected his sense of smell and taste and everything, and just didn't go away. And this has been a thing with a number of people who, experience these lengthy, long-term, because I know some people had the COVID fog or whatever that they called it. And then there are other people who just taste and smell and whatever just was gone for lengthy periods of time, even after they'd recovered and whatever. And so anyway, they felt like after the trauma of losing a child, losing an unborn child, that it was time for a change of scenery, major postpartum going down, excuse me, with Marianne. And so they're like, Marianne grew up in upstate Maine. Let's buy a place in Maine. And so the story begins with them going to check out this farmhouse in Maine, and they end up deciding to purchase it. But interesting thing about the setup with this one is that there is this weird path which is enclosed by trees that is right beside the house, and it goes to, I guess, what you would consider more of the center of town, where there's this general store where Willie strikes up a friendship with this amusing British character who runs it with his daughters and granddaughters and wife and everything. And so when he makes his first trip to this small little grocer place, this little market, he is given by the owner a pram. And so I didn't know what the hell a pram was until I was like, oh, it's a British term for a little baby carriage kind of thing. And you see it on the cover. And this is why when we had the Cujo sequel, Rattlesnakes, I think it was called, which was in You Like It Darker, that story also dealt with a baby carriage kind of thing. And I had read the pram about 6 months, a year, whatever it was before. And I was just like, oh man, Steve, I was like, Steve, your son wrote a story with a baby carriage, pram, whatever, that was so much better than this one. And so maybe that kind of, I was wearing the rose-tinted glasses where I was just comparing the two stories. The pram is significantly better, by the way, significantly better. But in any event, so Willie takes this pram with the groceries and he pushes it back to the house and unloads everything. But there is a local bit of people that I guess you could call them kind of like Amish or something, but they're just a local, very religious sect of people. And if I gave you some more, this is where I don't want to spoil where this story goes, but there is a little bit of presumed possible religious, eccentricity going down when you get some of the backstory from the shop owner guy that he tells Willie. But at the bottom of everything, and what I think makes this story so special, is the fact that it is about just the postpartum, just miscarriage grief from the husband's side. Okay, and it's how he is trying to deal with the grief that he's so concerned with, just making his wife comfortable and making his wife happy in the midst of all of her insane amounts of depression and just, messing up at her job and not wanting to even leave the house and all this different stuff. And so it's not like he's the one trying to keep everything together, but he's also repressing his grief at the same time. And so with pushing around this little pram, this baby carriage, he is kind of thinking of what could have been, and also another stipulation is that him and his wife aren't going to try anymore, and so he's like, it's just gonna be us, for the rest of my life, this relationship, everything. And so he's lamenting the loss, and it's very heartfelt and it's very sad in a lot of ways. But so I don't really want to go into the second half of the story and where this eventually goes to, but there is just rising resentment and just him trying to work through his feelings, and also his wife realizing that he's kind of slipping away a little bit in some of his growing delusions and whatever. They find like a headless raccoon on the front of the house, and they're trying to figure out, is it animals? Is it the weird local religious people? Is it something different? I mean, combinations of things. And so this is, and the ending kicks ass to this, man. Really big fan of it. And so this is the one of the two that I gotta say, man, the Pram, they've already optioned Ushers and everything, but this is the one that I would love to see turned into a movie, because it just felt so much more original, so much more rich. Yes, at times reminiscent of some folk horror stuff that I've seen before because of setting and, some of the potential misdirects. I mean, things like that. But, just as a whole, and the fact that it had something unique to say in, the grieving aspect and, loss of an unborn child. And it really made me wonder if, because Joe is on his second marriage now, and him and his new wife have a couple younger children. I think he said he's got like 2-year-olds or, somewhere around there. And so, it makes me wonder if this was coming from his own personal experience. They say, write what you know, obviously. And so I think that's kind of a big thing, that perhaps this happened in Joe's own life with his second wife, and he incorporated it into this story, because this felt so much more personal in comparison with Ushers. And, once again, as I always say on whether it's here or the horror show with Cecil, I mean, art is subjective. It's, there's no account for personal taste and whatever, but I loved the Pram, and I believe it's also, you can get Audible, you want to listen to it for a couple bucks, also on Kindle. So that is my breakdown of the 2 stories that Joe has released in the last year and a half-ish, whatever it's been, just a little over a year. So guys, check out the Pram, and also that's not to completely disparage Ushers, but I just was not as big of a fan of that one. But holy hell, King friggin' Sorrow, guys! I can't wait to throw on some Demons and Wizards or something like that, and just get to reading this book, man. It's going to be so very exciting. Once again, it is arriving on October 21st. 2025, same month that just less than a week before. So in the same week. So that Friday on the 17th, you're going to get Black Phone 2. And then just a few days later, man, you get a new ginormous tome that is, that's obviously the Spanish version. It was a gift to me from one of the viewers. But yeah, guys, I'm so very stoked for a huge Joe Hill book, a second Joe Hill film, and come on, where the hell is Heart-Shaped Box? That's the one that I want to see if I can't get the Pram. So in any event, guys, that is going to bring the end to our proceedings today. I extend a grande gracias to everybody who made it through this lengthy video. I always, whenever I do have the opportunity in the zaniness of school, I'm almost done with this degree, but, whenever I do get the opportunity, when there's a big news announcement, or I always want to, give you your money's worth, in the freedom of YouTube and everything. But, if you're going to tune into something, I want to make sure it's not me just trying to talk for at least, make 20 minutes out of talking about a short story. I want to have a sufficient amount of content that I've given the proper research to, and I don't want to waste your time, and I'm so very thankful that you spent some of yours with me. So once again, that's going to do it. Donc, arigato, merci, gracias, everybody. Thank you so very much. And I guess I'm not going to say until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, even though it is another level of the tower, part of Midworld with Joe's stuff. But thanks again, everybody, and stay tuned. And if in the meantime, read some Joe Hill. Peace. Fuego!